Hi there, you're listening to episode number 14, part 2 of the Estranged Heart podcast, and I'm your host, Kreed Revere. Welcome back to our returning listeners, and if this is your first time here, welcome. As we begin part 2 of this episode, I invite you to grab a cup of coffee or tea, settle in, listen with an open heart, and remember the disclaimer that I am not a therapist or a counselor, and nothing within this podcast or this episode should be considered or taken as therapy. If you are in need of therapeutic support, such as counseling, please seek out a therapist near you. So again, trigger warning, this is a continuation of part 1 of episode 14 regarding trauma and estrangement. And please be aware of your own headspace as it relates to this topic. If you're not in a place today to be open and receptive to this, it's okay. Please just listen at a different time. Your own mental health is what is most important. And again, I just want to repeat this. I just want to repeat 2 quotes that were in part 1 of this episode. The first one from Kenny Weiss: no matter what kind of childhood we've had, no one escapes trauma while growing up. And the second one from Dr. Gabor Mate: all of the diagnoses that you deal with, depression, anxiety, ADHD, bipolar illness, PTSD, even psychosis, are significantly rooted in trauma. They are manifestations of trauma. Therefore, the diagnoses don't explain anything. The problem in the medical world is that we diagnose someone and we think that's the explanation for their behaviors, right? That was my input. He's behaving that way because he is psychotic. She's behaving that way because she has ADHD. No one has ADHD. No one has psychosis. These are processes within the individual. It's not a thing that you have. This is a process that expresses your life experience. It has meaning in every single case. So when we're talking about mental illnesses, I hear it oftentimes as an excuse or reason, maybe not an excuse, but a reason that estranged parents give for the estrangement. And while that may be true, it may be true that your estranged adult child has a diagnosis of something, some sort of mental illness. But again, try to get beneath that. There's a reason why they have the diagnosis they have, and it is not solely genetics. It's not. One of the things, and this is just kind of a side note, I remember the day that I had this aha moment, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, like, no more can anyone be a victim to their genetics. And that aha that I had was we all have the potential to have any illness, any mental illness, any physical illness, disease, what have you. But could it be that our environment or lived experience be what actually flips the switch on a particular illness? And I happen to think that it does. I think that we're all born with the potential to have any and every disease or illness out there, i.e. cancer, hypertension, diabetes, mental illness, any of those things. I think that we all have the potential to have those things, but our life experiences dictate which switch gets flipped on. And that to me helps me to understand and explain why, because I for years I was always like, well, okay, I have this, my family members have cancer, but so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so in my family never had cancer. And I think this all came about when my grandmother passed away, my mom's mom. She was 86 or 87 years old when she passed away, lifelong smoker from like her teens. She smoked. And when she passed away, and pre-death, never had an ounce of cancer in her. Never. So when I came to this, I was like, oh my gosh, this could explain so much, that based off of our life experiences and things, we end up with certain diseases where other people do not. And so anyway, that helps. That's my belief. You can take it, think about it, ponder it, toss it in file 13, whatever you feel is best for you. However, I would, as I do with everything on this podcast and in my life, I would encourage you to just sit with that for a bit and what I call chew on it, right? Like, wonder if there's any validity to that. Wonder what Google would say. Wonder what this, that, and the other thing. And I would encourage you to check out epigenetics, because that helps explain a lot of this. Again, epigenetics. So, anyway, I digress. Okay, so back to part 2, and we're talking about trauma. In part 1, we talked about what trauma was, some examples of childhood trauma, and then how, in my own personal experience, how I experienced trauma as a child, and later as an adult, and then how I traumatized my own children, and then how I was traumatized as an estranged parent. And I want to get into, in this part 2, I want to talk about how this affects estrangement, how trauma affects estrangement. And it affects estrangement because of the behaviors that our estranged adult children have as a result of trauma. And again, just because you may have experienced quote unquote more severe trauma, end quote, than your estranged adult children, and you did not estrange from your parents, doesn't mean that your children must follow the same route, the same journey, walk in your shoes. They don't have to. They're individuals. They're their own person. And so how they choose to deal with things in their life may be completely and totally different than the way that you do. And so I mentioned earlier in part 1, talking about a psychologist that I follow on Instagram, the holistic psychologist. And I ended up posting on the Estranged Heart Instagram account yesterday something that the holistic psychologist posted. And I just wanted to kind of go through some of these with you so that you can see how trauma affects behaviors and how those behaviors may come into play with the estrangement experience that you're currently going through. So, as a recap, I talk about Dr. Gabor Mate and also the holistic psychologist. So again, generally trauma is defined as a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. And again, I can't stress this enough. Two people can go through the same, quote unquote, same experience and have it affect them differently. And it doesn't mean that one is right and one is wrong. Okay, so keep that in mind. Again, Dr. Gabor Mate, a physician who specializes in attachment, addiction, stress, and childhood development, defines trauma as not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you as a result of what happens to you. And the holistic psychologist defines trauma as it's not about the event, it's about how the event impacts us, based on the support system of those closest to us, how it impacts our nervous system, and how it disconnects us from our true and authentic selves. Trauma leaves us with coping mechanisms and patterns that no longer serve us. Okay? So, childhood trauma, according to this holistic psychologist, it can be a parent figure denying your reality. And that shows up in behaviors as an adult as, quote unquote, what's known as gaslighting, and gaslighting is denying the reality of others. Okay. And confusion around what is real and not real, relying on other people to tell you what's true, and disconnection from your own intuition. Again, a parent figure denying your reality. Stop it. It's not that bad. Stop the crying. You're not hurt that bad. That's denying a child's reality. It may be hurting them just that bad. Okay? And so that later shows up when they've had their reality denied. That later shows up them as an adult behaving by gaslighting others, denying the reality of others. So if they as a child had their reality denied, they generally, oftentimes, grow up to be adults who deny the reality of others. And that means they could deny your reality as their parent. Okay. The next one is being told directly or indirectly you can't or shouldn't experience certain emotions. And that shows up as adult behaviors in neediness or avoidance in relationships, codependency, chronic and social anxiety, and fear of criticism and self-expression. Again, repeating. Being told directly or indirectly you can't or should not experience certain emotions is a type of trauma to a child, which later shows up as a behavior from them as an adult as being needy in relationships or avoidance in a relationship, being codependent, having chronic social anxiety, having fear of criticism, and fear of self-expression. Okay? I was told many times growing up that I could not, should not be, was not really could not, it was should not be experiencing certain emotions. And my main emotion, because I never felt heard and listened to, is I got really angry. And so I was an angry child, quote unquote, angry child. And I was always forever being told I should not be angry. I was raised in the South. Good little girls in the South do not get angry. And I was told all the time I should not be angry. And so I developed all of these things as an adult. I got needy in relationships because I wanted someone to see and hear me and understand me. And then when they got close to me to see and hear me and understand me, then I was pushing them away because it was scary to me because I hadn't had that. And so it was an unknown. I wanted it, but I didn't know how to have it because I had never had it. And so when it came to me, it was completely foreign to me. And so I pushed it away. And then I was very codependent in the relationship with my children. Never knew that, never understood it until I got myself into therapy. And then I was mortified, absolutely mortified. Oh my God. I'll never forget being in that therapy office, sitting on that sofa and thinking, oh my God, here I thought I was this strong and independent woman who was not codependent with anyone. And oh my God, it was my children. I mean, it was just wow, what a moment. What a moment. Totally rocked my world. Okay, so the next one is the type of emotional or childhood abuse is having a parent figure who cannot regulate their emotions. And that shows up, if you experience that as a child, it shows up as a behavior in you as an adult, as either an inability to self-soothe or cope with a stressful situation, a lack of resilience, substance use or addictions, unhealthy coping mechanisms, a lack of vulnerability, issues with open communication, and nervous system dysregulation. So that's how it shows up as an adult with their behaviors. If you have a parent figure who cannot regulate their emotions, I could not regulate my emotions as an parent, as an adult. I could not regulate my emotions. I was angry a lot of the time. And my children suffer today with these adult behaviors, with all of these things I've just listed. Inability to self-soothe, and if you're not able to self-soothe, you look for other ways to self-soothe. And most oftentimes people turn to some sort of addiction. And let me remind you that addiction does not necessarily have to be just drugs and alcohol. Addiction can be addiction to work, addiction to food, addiction to working out, addiction to sex, addiction to video games and scrolling the internet. Again, addiction does not have to be just drugs and alcohol. So that's another way it shows up. Another one is, another type of abuse is not being seen or heard. You've heard me talk about that for myself as a child. I never felt seen or heard. And that shows up as adult behaviors in neediness or avoidance in relationships, codependency, chronic social anxiety, and fear of criticism or self-expression. I feared criticism forever and a day. Still have issues with it, although not as bad as it once was. Would fall apart if anybody criticized me. And I feared tremendously feared self-expression, because I feared somebody making fun of me, laughing at me, teasing me, criticizing me, all of those things. And so it took me until I hit 50, until I turned 50, before I began feeling any kind of ability to express myself as my true self. I mean, in my business and in my professional life, I can, be all about being the manager and taking control of things and making things happen and all of that kind of stuff. But my true inner self, my authentic self, my tender sides, things like that, no way. Nope, not gonna happen. Because I never felt seen and heard as a kid. And again, my mom didn't know how to do that. She had a mom who was a single mom in the 50s and 60s and was busy trying to provide for her kids, and, just wasn't a thing. So the next one is having a parent figure who does not model boundaries. And that shows up as adult behaviors in an inability to set boundaries, guilt or fear around saying no, codependency, inability to understand your own needs and how to get them met, lack of self-care, lack of autonomy, I'll get it straight in a minute, and chronic self-betrayal. I see this a lot in estrangement situations and a lot with the ones that estranged parents describe as the gatekeeper. So an estranged adult child who has a spouse who the estranged parent feels has instigated the estrangement. So if we look at it through that lens, right, is if the adult child so let's just say it's a son, estranged adult child is a son, and he has a wife who has, quote unquote, is the gatekeeper, has caused the estrangement, quote unquote, caused the estrangement with the adult parent, with a parent. If that son experienced having a parent, mother or father, who did not model boundaries, they then do not have an ability to set boundaries themselves, to be able to say to their spouse, no, I'm going to have a relationship with my parent. If you choose to not be involved with that, then that's one thing, but this is my parent and I will have a relationship with my parent. It could result in them having a fear around telling their spouse no, right? And they could be codependent with their spouse. And so their quote unquote survival in the subconscious mind, their survival depends on their spouse. And so they will do whatever their spouse says in order to quote unquote survive. Okay. So again, huge piece I see with a lot of adults, adult children. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about is, again, how some of these behaviors show up, again, as a reminder to what experiences might be traumatic, is physical, sexual, or psychological abuse and neglect. And again, that does not have to mean you're just beating the hell out of your kids. Psychological abuse can be all these things that we just talked about. Right? You're living your life. You're trying to put food on the table and a roof over the head and over their heads. And in the process, you're traumatizing your kids. And there's no intent with that for the most part. Most parents do not intentionally traumatize their children, but it happens. And we have to accept that. We have to accept that it happened before we can do anything to change anything. Okay? Because if you don't accept it, then in your eyes, there's nothing to change. And I'm here to tell you that your adult children don't feel that way. To them, there is something to change. So natural and technological disasters or terrorism, I think our kids today and over the last however many years, with school shootings and these mass shootings and things, again, family and community violence, sudden or violent loss of a loved one. And that can be something as simple as a divorce and one parent exits the home, or it could be a sudden and tragic death. Substance use disorders by the person or family, and serious accidents or life-threatening illnesses, and things like military family related stressors, something as seemingly benign as a family member being deployed. Well, now we've got this parent who's been here and now is not here every day. That's a type of trauma that children experience. So how do they show up? What are these signs and symptoms of trauma? What can we be looking for? What can you look back and say, oh, wow, did my kid? Yep, I can see that. I can see where they demonstrated that behavior or this behavior or what have you. Some of those are intense and ongoing emotional upset, right? Again, I was very intense as a kid, angry, right? Intense emotion, upset. There's a reason for that. Most people don't go around, including children, don't go around being upset and angry all the time. They just don't. So if that's happening, there's a reason why it's happening. Depressive symptoms or anxiety. Okay. Behavioral changes, difficulties with self-regulation. And again, right here, this is the most important one. Problems relating to others or forming attachments. And that can be as an adult as well. Regressions or loss of previously acquired skills. I see that I work in this field of mental health, and I see that a lot with some kiddos coming into our office, where parents will say, well, they used to be able to do this and that and the other thing, and now they can't, or now they've regressed. And attention and academic difficulties, nightmares, difficulty sleeping and eating, physical symptoms such as aches and pains. A lot of kids will just, their tummy hurts, their legs hurt. I used to have horrific, what was called growing pains back then. And I have to wonder now if that wasn't some sort of trauma, a reaction response, my body response to some sort of trauma. So, I think it's super important to look back, see these behaviors. If your children are doing things today, there's a reason why they're doing them. There's a reason why you are doing what you're doing. You, as an estranged adult parent, you have been traumatized. And I hear it from, I don't think I've ever heard of a parent not experiencing one or all of these symptoms. And, from I'm not able to sleep, I've withdrawn from my friends that I used to go out and hang with all the time. So that social isolation, depression, anxiety, all of those things that you're experiencing now as a result of your trauma. So if you experience those, if you have changed by experiencing the trauma of estrangement, do you think that it's possible that your children have changed as a result of trauma in their life? And it doesn't necessarily mean it had to come directly from you. It could have come from another parent. It could have come from an older sibling in the home. It could have come from a grandparent, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you, as the main caretaker and parent in the family, caused this. That's not what I'm saying. I'm asking you to entertain the idea that maybe it did happen. However it happened, by whomever it happened. But that it happened. And so how can I understand that it happened and see these behaviors as a result of that trauma, and then begin to have a little bit of compassion? And that's where the heart begins to change. That's where I begin to see the softening of the heart. And that is the end goal here. Because when you can soften your heart towards yourself and your adult children, that's when you have the potential to change. That's when you have the potential to reconcile. And if you cannot reconcile because your estranged adult child wants nothing to do with you, you at least can have a softened heart in going forward with your life without them. And you can have a larger heart that can open up and receive love in other ways from other people in your life, instead of staying stuck in the one place where you feel that you're not receiving love. So I hope that this gives you a little bit more to think about. I know this episode 14, parts 1 and 2, is really, really long, but I think that it's really important to understand, because I'm a firm believer that I think that trauma is at the root of a lot of estrangement cases. Not all, but a lot of them. And the more we can understand, the more we can educate ourselves, the more we can understand, and the more we can then begin to soften our hearts. Because we realize that, oh my gosh, these things happened. I didn't know it at the time that that's what it was. I had no idea when I was raising my girls that I was inducing trauma on them. I had zero idea that was happening. But it happened. And I had to recognize that and accept that before I could do anything else. And it was in that recognition, and that acceptance and recognition and understanding is when I was able to get to the place to be able to sincerely apologize and to hear their pain. without making excuses, without saying, yeah, but. Again, I hope that this has been helpful in some way, somehow, giving you a little bit of food for thought, something to chew on. And if you have questions, I'm open to hearing those. Drop me an email at theestrangedheart@gmail.com. Again, theestrangedheart@gmail.com. And until next time.